"You've got to be kidding me," I muttered under my breath as the waiter slid the leather folder across the table. My eyes fixed on the bill. 2,347 for one dinner. My stomach dropped. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The numbers blurred for a moment as I tried to wrap my head around it. A heavy silence blanketed the table. Every single one of them, Chloe's friends, her sisters as she called them, was staring at me now, waiting, judging. It was a trap, and just like that, I realized this wasn't about the dinner. It was about them seeing if I could handle this moment. If I could prove I was good enough for Chloe and her friends. If I could prove that I was the type of guy who fit in with their world. But I wasn't the fool they thought I was, not anymore. I didn't panic. I didn't get upset. I just took a deep breath and stared back at Chloe. Her lips curled into a smile, the kind that made it clear she was testing me, waiting to see if I would break. "You've got this, right?" she said. Her voice was casual, like it was the most natural thing in the world for someone to spend over $2,000 on a dinner. Her eyes gleamed, but I didn't flinch. Not yet. I calmly looked at the waiter, then back at Chloe. "Give me a minute," I said, my voice steady. I wasn't angry, but I wasn't going to let them see how much this stung. I knew something they didn't. And as I reached into my pocket to grab my card, I couldn't help but think this was far from over. "You won't believe what happened next. My name's Ethan Harper. I'm 29 and I work as a financial analyst. For the last 6 years, I've been grinding away at my job, climbing up the corporate ladder, not rich, but comfortable. I make a good living, about $140,000 a year, plus some decent bonuses. I've got a modest condo in Midtown and a paid-off Subaru WRX. Nothing flashy. Just enough to live a good life. At least, that's how I thought my life was. Then I met Chloe. She was everything on the outside, gorgeous, smart, charming. The kind of woman you don't expect to notice someone like me. But she did. And I guess that's when I let myself get caught up in the illusion. I thought it would be different. I thought maybe this time I could actually make it work. But from the start, I should have seen the signs. Chloe wasn't like the other women I'd dated. She had this energy, this charisma that made her seem untouchable. She worked in marketing, had a stylish apartment, and drove a BMW. Every time we went out, she'd post about it, making sure to capture the perfect photo. It wasn't about the moment. It was about the image she could create for the world. But there was something more to her. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. The first few months were great. Everything clicked. But then, I started to notice the little things, the way she always forgot her wallet, or how she could never seem to pay for anything. No big deal at first, right? Everyone has their moments. But as time went on, it started to add up. And then there were the constant talks about her inner circle, the exclusive group of friends she kept hyping up. Every time she mentioned them, I could feel the pressure mounting. If they didn't approve of me, we were done. I didn't want to admit it. But I was already in too deep. I cared about what they thought. I cared about what Chloe thought. I let her set the stage for what was supposed to be a casual relationship, and I bought into it. But now I was about to show her and everyone else at that table that I wasn't the guy they thought I was. Before we dive into how I turned the tables, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and leave a comment telling me what you would have done in my shoes. Trust me, You won't want to miss how this all unfolded. I promise you, it's going to get real interesting. But first, let's go back to that dinner and see exactly how it all began. The evening that changed everything started off like any other dinner invitation, or at least, that's what I told myself. Chloe had been talking about this dinner for weeks, hyping it up as if it were some monumental event. But it wasn't just a dinner, it was a test. I didn't know it at the time. But everything was a test with Chloe. She had made it clear that her friends were her world. And if they didn't like me, then we were done. It wasn't just about impressing Chloe anymore, it was about surviving in her world, with her friends as the gatekeepers. If I passed their test, maybe this relationship could move forward. If I failed, well, I couldn't even imagine the consequences. Meridian was no ordinary restaurant. It was one of those places you see in the movies chandeliers that probably cost more than my entire condo. Marble floors so shiny you could see your reflection. It was the kind of place where you felt out of place just walking through the door. But I didn't want to feel out of place. Not tonight. I wanted to show Chloe and her friends that I could handle it, that I belonged. So, I dressed up. New suit, polished shoes. I even detailed my car just to make sure they saw me as someone who could fit in. But the moment I walked in, I knew I was in over my head. Chloe was already seated at a massive table in the corner with her 6 friends. They looked almost unreal. Sitting there with their perfectly styled hair, designer outfits, and perfectly timed smiles. It was like stepping into a movie scene where everyone's role was already set and I was the outsider trying to figure out my part. "Let me introduce you to my girls," Chloe said, her voice a little too upbeat, almost rehearsed. And as I shook each one of their hands, I realized something: this wasn't going to be a normal dinner. They weren't just looking at me, they were assessing me. And they were going to do it with or without my consent. First, there was Victoria, a real estate agent who barely looked at me before scanning my outfit. Then came Samantha, who worked in fashion PR. But you'd never know it by how little she paid attention to me. Ashley, an influencer with tens of thousands of followers, didn't even bother to say hello. Her eyes were already glued to her phone. And the rest, well, I didn't even remember their names. They didn't matter. What mattered was how I was fitting into their world. I could feel the coldness in the air as soon as I sat down. They had already started without me. 3 bottles of wine were already open, half drunk, and the appetizers had been picked over. They weren't waiting for me. I was just another accessory at this table of high society. The questions came fast. "So, Ethan, financial analyst. That sounds like good money, huh?" Victoria said, barely glancing at me as she refilled her wine glass. "Where do you live?" Samantha asked, still looking at her phone. "Midtown. I own a condo there," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Condo nice. How many bedrooms?" Victoria asked, as if measuring my worth by square footage. It was clear. This wasn't about getting to know me. It was about seeing if I was worthy of sitting at their table. Then came the question about my car. "So, what do you drive?" Ashley asked, a sly smile on her lips. "Subaru WRX," I said. I could already tell by the way her eyes flicked down to my shoes that she didn't approve. "Oh, a Subaru," she said, in a tone that made it clear she had never seen anyone with such a practical car. Interesting. The questions kept coming. questions about my job, my lifestyle, even my workout routine. "What's your gym routine like?" Ashley asked, like she was picking apart my entire existence. I didn't know what they wanted from me. Every answer felt like I was losing. Every word out of my mouth felt like a mistake. I was failing their test. And I knew it. The dinner itself, it was a joke. Every dish that came out was more expensive than the last. Wagyu steaks, lobster bisque, wine that could pay my rent for a month. And they ordered without even asking me if I was okay with it. They didn't care. This wasn't about sharing a meal, it was about watching me squirm. I could see their eyes shift, moving from my outfit to my answers, mentally calculating every detail. They were sizing me up, watching for any sign that I didn't belong. I wasn't a person to them. I was a test, and I wasn't passing. But the worst part, Chloe didn't even seem to notice. The entire time. Chloe just sat there, smiling, laughing, completely immersed in the conversation with her friends. She didn't acknowledge what was happening, didn't see how they were dissecting me like I was some sort of experiment. She was enjoying herself, and I was sinking further into the hole they were digging for me. It wasn't about impressing Chloe anymore. It wasn't even about the money. It was about something much worse. It was about control. I had been sitting there for what felt like hours, trying my best to stay calm while the storm of judgments rained down on me. With every passing minute, I could feel the walls closing in. They weren't just evaluating me, they were dismantling me piece by piece. It wasn't even about me anymore. It was about their world, their expectations. And no matter how hard I tried to keep up, I could feel myself slipping further and further behind. Chloe had her eyes on me. She had to know how important this night was. But she didn't seem to care. She was too busy chatting with her friends, laughing and joking as though everything was fine. She didn't notice how they kept throwing me into the lion's den. One question after another, all aimed at testing my worth. "So, Ethan, what do you do outside of work?" Samantha asked, her tone casual but with a hidden agenda. She was trying to gauge how I spent my free time, trying to see if I was the kind of guy who could keep up with their high-end lifestyle. "I play basketball on weekends, lift weights a few times a week," I said, trying to sound confident. But I knew it wasn't enough. They wanted more. Ashley, who had barely stopped scrolling through her phone all night, finally looked up at me and asked, "You post gym pics, on Instagram. Like most guys who actually work out," her words were sharp, cutting. A challenge disguised as casual conversation. I hesitated, taken aback. "No," I said, "I don't really do that. I'm more of a low-key kind of guy." Ashley smirked, but not in a friendly way. "Interesting," she said, raising an eyebrow. It was clear that my lack of social media presence, especially in an age when everyone seemed to live for their online image, was a red flag to her. I could feel my anxiety rising. I was being torn apart for things that didn't matter, things that shouldn't matter. This was supposed to be about us, about getting to know each other. But instead, it felt like a performance. And I was failing. Then came the real kicker. The one moment that solidified what I had been slowly realizing all night. None of this was about Chloe. None of this was about building a relationship. It was about proving my value, showing I was worthy of her and her friends. Victoria, the one who had been so quiet up until this point, suddenly spoke up. "So, Ethan," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "how do you feel about providing for the people you care about?" She leaned forward slightly, her gaze never leaving me. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. A test. I froze. What was I supposed to say? Providing for the people I care about. It sounded like something out of a handbook on relationships in the 1950s. But that wasn't what they expected me to say. "I think it's important to support the people you love," I said carefully, trying to avoid saying anything that would make me sound weak. But it was too late. I could see the look in their eyes, the way they were all watching me, waiting to see if I would pass the test. Chloe, who had been laughing with the others just moments before, suddenly turned to me. "You get it, right?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. She was no longer looking at me as her boyfriend. She was looking at me like I was a candidate for a job interview, waiting to hear if I would say the right thing. I could feel my stomach tighten. This wasn't just dinner anymore. This was a job interview, a test of my worth. And I was losing. The worst part, Chloe wasn't even noticing. She wasn't seeing what was happening. She was wrapped up in her perfect world with her perfect friends. And I was the one who had to fit in, whether I wanted to or not. Then, as if things couldn't get worse, the real absurdity began. They ordered more wine, more expensive wine. Each glass seemed to signal that I was sinking deeper. The conversation went from judgments about my lifestyle to overt comments about how real men acted. At one point, Victoria casually mentioned how her last boyfriend couldn't keep up with her. "He was so cheap," she said, looking at me like I was about to become the next failure on her list. "A real man knows how to take care of his woman and her friends. You know, be a provider. A provider." That word hung in the air like a dark cloud, suffocating any real connection we could have had. It wasn't about love or respect. It was about status. It was about how much money I could spend on them. I didn't know how to respond. They weren't asking questions anymore. They were giving me an ultimatum. And I could feel the pressure building, the anxiety creeping up on me. It was a game, and I was losing. And that's when it all started to unravel. The moment the waiter placed the check in front of me, everything shifted. Time seemed to slow down as I stared at the leather folder. There it was, my test. And this time, there was no getting out of it. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting. The same eyes that had scrutinized every answer I gave, every movement I made. But now it was different. Now, the stakes were higher. I wasn't just under pressure, I was cornered. I had no choice but to play the role they expected me to play, but I wasn't about to let them win. Chloe smiled at me. She didn't know what was coming. She thought I'd just pay, like I had before, and everything would be fine. She didn't realize that I was already done pretending. I reached for the folder, but instead of immediately pulling out my card like I usually would, I hesitated. I needed a second to think, a second to process everything that had been happening. They had been testing me all night, and I had failed. But I wasn't going to fail this test. I wasn't going to let this be the end. I glanced at Chloe, who still had that gleam in her eyes, the look that said she had me figured out. "Babe, you've got this, right?" she asked, her voice full of fake sweetness. For a second, I almost believed her. I almost thought I could keep going down this path. But I knew it was over. This wasn't love. This was manipulation. And I wasn't going to play their game any longer. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice steady but firm. "But I can't do this anymore." Her smile faltered. Just for a moment. I could see the confusion in her eyes as she tried to process what I was saying. "What do you mean?" she asked, as if she hadn't heard me correctly. I placed the folder back on the table, not touching it. I'm done. This whole thing, it's not me. I'm not your provider. I'm not your puppet." The room fell silent. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the other women at the table seemed to realize something had changed. They weren't just watching me anymore. They were watching Chloe. They had expected me to fold, to pay, to play along. But now the tables were turned. Chloe opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her expression shifted from confusion to irritation. But I could see the cracks starting to form in the facade she'd so carefully built. "You can't be serious," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "You're going to embarrass me like this in front of my friends." I didn't answer immediately. I just looked at her, letting the weight of my silence speak for me. She had been using this whole situation to test me, to see if I could handle her life. But I wasn't here to play a role. I was here to be myself. "I'm not embarrassed," I finally said, my voice calm. "I'm just tired of pretending. You've been testing me all night, and I'm done. I don't want to be part of this anymore." For a moment, Chloe looked like she might cry. But instead of softening, her expression hardened. "So, this is it?" she asked, her voice cold now. "You're just going to walk away?" I nodded. "Yes. I don't want to be with someone who sees me as a paycheck." Her face twisted in disbelief. "You don't get it?" she said, shaking her head. "This is about more than money. This is about me knowing what I want, and you clearly can't handle that." I could feel the anger rising in me, but I pushed it down. This wasn't the time for that. "No, Chloe. This is about control. It's about you needing to feel superior. And I'm not going to let you use me to make you feel better about yourself." For the first time all night, Chloe was speechless. She didn't know what to say. She couldn't manipulate me anymore. And that, I realized, was the moment everything changed. But this wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. Because the truth was, Chloe had underestimated me. I wasn't going to let this go. As I stood up to leave, something inside me clicked. I wasn't walking away from her. I was walking towards something much bigger. This wasn't just about the dinner. It was about taking control of my life again. And now, it was time for me to take back what was rightfully mine. The moment I walked out of that restaurant, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. It was like a weight I didn't even know I was carrying had been lifted from my shoulders. Chloe's shocked expression, the disbelief, the frustration, it had all been worth it. But I wasn't done, not by a long shot. I walked away. Yes. But I wasn't just leaving behind a dinner tab or a failed relationship. I was leaving behind a world that had tried to control me. And now, I was going to make sure Chloe and her friends would never forget how they'd treated me. I pulled my phone out as soon as I hit the sidewalk. My best friend, Lucas, had been telling me for months that Chloe wasn't what she seemed. He'd seen the signs early on, but I hadn't listened. He'd always said I deserved better. But tonight, everything clicked. I had to do more than just walk away. I had to make sure they knew the price of playing games with me. I texted Lucas immediately. "She's gone too far. I need your help." I didn't wait for a reply. I knew what I had to do. Lucas worked in cybersecurity, and he'd been a close friend for years. After spending time in military intelligence, he'd transitioned into private sector work. There was no one I trusted more to help me turn the tables. If anyone could track down Chloe's friends and expose their game, it was him. Lucas texted me back almost immediately. "On it, I'll get everything we need. Just hold tight." The next few days were a blur. I spent my time doing what I had to do, getting my life back together, trying to make sense of what had happened, and waiting for Lucas to work his magic. But I knew the storm wasn't over. Chloe and her friends were about to feel the fallout of what they'd started. By the end of the week, Lucas had uncovered everything. "Dude, you were right." Lucas told me when we met up at his place. He was sitting in front of multiple monitors, a sea of data spread out before him. "This goes deeper than we thought. They've been running a scam. It's not just Chloe, it's her entire friend group. They've been playing men for money, using this whole provider test as a way to drain their victims." I wasn't surprised. But I didn't expect what Lucas showed me next. He pulled up a thread of messages from a private group chat. It was a collection of conversations between Chloe and her friends Victoria, Ashley, Samantha, and the rest. Every detail, every conversation, every test they'd put men through. It was all right there, documented. "Look at this," Lucas said, pulling up a conversation from the night of the dinner. Chloe had been the mastermind. She'd orchestrated the whole thing, the dinner, the wine, the expensive food. It was all planned to see how much I'd spend, how much I could provide, how far I'd go to impress them. I was just another target in their game. But now, I had the upper hand. We dug deeper. Lucas used his resources to gather more information, screenshots, group chat logs, even financial details from the men they'd targeted. They had been playing men like chess pieces, moving them around, testing them, and then discarding them once they drained what they could. But Chloe, Victoria, and the others had made one huge mistake. They hadn't expected me to fight back. I decided it was time to expose them. It wasn't enough to walk away. I had to make sure everyone knew what they were really doing. I started by setting up a website, something clean, professional, easy to access. I called it golddiggeralert.com. On it, I posted everything: the screenshots of their conversations, the detailed breakdown of their scams, and links to the social media profiles that they had used to target their victims. It was all there, irrefutable, undeniable evidence of their manipulation. I didn't just want to get back at them. I wanted to make sure they never did this to anyone again. Lucas helped with the details. He tracked down other men who had been targeted by Chloe and her friends. We had their stories. We had the receipts. We had everything we needed to take them down. Then we made the site public. At first, it didn't seem like much. Just another website on the internet. But then, we took it to Reddit, Twitter, and TikTok. The response was massive. It spread like wildfire. Within hours, the story was everywhere. People couldn't stop talking about the group of women who had been playing men for money using provider tests as a cover for their gold-digging operation. The media picked up on it too. News outlets started calling. Blogs, influencers. Everyone wanted a piece of the story. And as the pressure mounted, Chloe and her friends started to feel the heat. It didn't take long for everything to start unraveling. The website I'd put together, golddiggeralert.com, had gone viral. The more people saw it, the more attention it attracted. What started as an exposé on a group of manipulative women quickly snowballed into a full-fledged media storm. Within hours of going public, Chloe and her friends' world began to crumble. The group chat logs, the detailed accounts of how they had manipulated men, everything was out in the open now. It wasn't just gossip. It was evidence. Irrefutable, undeniable evidence. At first, they tried to ignore it, thinking it would blow over. But that never happens when the internet is involved. It wasn't just strangers who were watching. They were being bombarded by people they knew. Their friends, their co-workers, even their families. Everyone was seeing the truth. Victoria's real estate company was the first to react. I don't know who tipped them off. But the next thing I knew, her brokerage was distancing itself from her, putting out a public statement denying any association with her. That didn't stop the rumors from circulating, though. It was too late for damage control. Madison wasn't far behind. She worked as a paralegal, and soon enough, her law firm quietly let her go. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction knowing that her career, built on manipulating people, was crumbling right before her eyes. Ashley, the influencer, had the worst of it. Her entire brand was built on appearances, on projecting the image of a successful, high-end lifestyle. But once her followers saw the truth behind the facade, her sponsorships vanished overnight. Brands she'd worked with for years pulled their deals within days. She went from being a social media darling to a pariah. And then there was Chloe. She had been the mastermind of it all, the one who orchestrated the dinner, the one who had used me and countless others as pawns in her twisted game. She called me multiple times, but I never answered. I could feel her desperation through the voicemail messages. "Ethan, please, you have to stop. This is ruining everything. You don't know what you're doing. Please, just let me explain." I wasn't interested in explanations. I had heard enough. The media coverage kept growing, and soon, local news picked up the story. It wasn't just a few blogs now, it was major outlets. The headline, "Financial Predators, How a Group of Women Used Provider Tests to Scam Men," was everywhere. It wasn't just my voice being heard, it was the voice of every man who had been targeted, every victim who had been too ashamed to speak up. The site had become a platform for them to share their stories, too. What started as my revenge had turned into a collective movement. But Chloe and her friends weren't the only ones who felt the heat. Their employers, their families, even their social circles were forced to face the truth. They were no longer the glamorous, untouchable women they had once been. They were exposed, and no one was buying their excuses anymore. Chloe's panic was palpable. I could almost hear her rage through the messages she sent. "I'm going to ruin you. Ethan," one text said, "you'll regret this." But I wasn't scared. I wasn't the one who had messed with the wrong person. She had underestimated me. And now, I was the one in control. As for me, I didn't care about her threats. What mattered was that I had taken back control of my life. Chloe and her friends had used me to test their power. But in the end, it was me who had the last word. And it wasn't just about getting revenge anymore. It was about making sure this never happened to anyone else. It's strange how things unfold sometimes. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind, a series of events I never could have predicted. One moment, I was just a guy trying to make a relationship work. And the next, I was leading a crusade to expose manipulation, deceit, and greed. What started as a dinner bill had turned into a personal awakening, and a chance for me to take control of my life once again. But even as the chaos settled and the consequences of Chloe and her friends' actions unfolded, I found myself reflecting on the bigger picture. What had I learned? What did all of this mean for me? For the men who had been targeted? For the people who had watched this all unfold? For one thing, I realized how much I had underestimated my own worth. Chloe and her friends wanted to measure me by what I could provide, how much I could spend, what car I drove, how much money I made. But the truth is, none of that mattered. They weren't interested in who I was as a person. They were interested in what I could offer them. It took me walking away, taking a stand, to see that I was worth so much more than they ever gave me credit for. In a way, this whole ordeal had been a lesson in self-respect. I had allowed myself to be manipulated because I thought I had to prove something. I thought that by fitting into their world, I could earn their approval. But I was wrong. The moment I realized that I didn't need their validation was the moment I truly gained my freedom. But it wasn't just about me. The site I had created, Gold Digger Alert, had sparked something bigger. It wasn't just a story about one guy who had been taken advantage of. It was about all the men who had been quietly exploited by people like Chloe. As the stories poured in, I realized this wasn't a rare occurrence. It was a system, a network of people using others to build their own sense of power, their own sense of worth, at the expense of others. And I had exposed it. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how important it was for people to know the truth, for men to speak out, for women, like Chloe, to face the consequences of their actions. But it wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. It was about making sure that people who think they can manipulate others for their own gain understand that there are always consequences. You can't just take without giving something back. And sooner or later, the truth comes out. As for Chloe and her friends, their lives were never the same. They became pariahs in their own social circles. The media coverage didn't just ruin their reputations, it exposed them for who they really were. But even in the midst of all that, I felt no satisfaction in their downfall. I didn't want them to suffer. I just wanted them to understand that their actions had consequences. I learned that standing up for yourself doesn't just mean walking away. Sometimes, it means using your voice, your power, your resources to make sure that what happened to you doesn't happen to someone else. It means taking back control when others try to take it from you. But the real question that remained was, how much longer would we allow people like Chloe and her friends to play these games? How many more men had to fall victim to this kind of manipulation before things changed? As I reflect on it now, I realize the most important thing I took away from this experience wasn't the revenge. It was the strength to walk away, to stand up for what I believe in, and to never let anyone dictate my worth. If you've ever been in a situation where you felt like you had to prove your worth to someone, I want you to know that you're not alone. And if you're ready to take back control of your life, to stop letting others define you, then start right now. You're worth so much more than they make you believe. If you've enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button, like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences. Let's keep the conversation going and make sure we all stand up for ourselves. After all, it's not about what we can give to others. It's about knowing our own value. Thanks for sticking with me through this. Remember, you are the one who decides what your worth is. Never forget that. Looking back on everything, I can't help but feel a mix of satisfaction and disbelief. Satisfaction, because I built something real. I built something that didn't come easy, something that was earned, step by step, from the ground up. But disbelief, because none of it had to go down the way it did. The truth is, I never set out to be at odds with my dad. Never planned to create this kind of conflict. I could have been content just running the shop he left behind. It wasn't about taking over, it was about knowing that my hard work and experience mattered, that it had value. But my dad chose Stephen. And that decision changed everything. Stephen, with his fancy degrees and corporate jargon, didn't understand what it took to keep a small business running. He was all about numbers, spreadsheets, and management theories, but none of that worked in the real world. Business isn't just about data and plans. It's about relationships. Relationships with your customers, employees, and suppliers. You can't fake that. And while Stephen was busy drawing up growth strategies, I was out there doing the work. I had been for years. In the end, I didn't need to destroy Stephen or anyone else. They did that to themselves. Every wrong decision Stephen made was one more step toward their downfall. Meanwhile, I stayed true to what I knew best, running a business the right way. Treat people with respect, do the work right, and everything else will follow. It wasn't flashy, but it was real. The funny thing is, when I first started my own shop, revenge wasn't even on my mind. I didn't want to take down my dad, or Stephen, or anyone else. I just wanted to prove that I could succeed on my own terms. I wanted to show myself that the skills I'd spent years honing weren't just for a small shop. They could build something bigger. But when you're pushed to the edge, something changes. You realize you've been underestimated, and that's when the plan starts to come together. At first, I didn't have a grand strategy to get back at anyone. I just focused on doing things the right way, one step at a time. And as I did, the pieces started falling into place. My business grew steadily. Word spread, and customers flocked to us. It wasn't about one big victory. It was about a steady accumulation of small wins. Each one proved that doing things the right way, without shortcuts, always works out in the end. And my dad, well, he eventually reached out. His tone was different this time. He didn't beg me to come back, but he did say something that stuck with me. I get it now. Matthew, I see what you were trying to tell me all these years. I was wrong. You were right. It wasn't an apology, and it wasn't what I had been waiting for. But it was a start. Maybe he finally understood that success isn't just handed to you, it's earned. And I had earned mine. The hard way. Still, even that call didn't change anything for me. I had moved on. I wasn't the same person I was when I walked out of that shop. I had built my own business, created my own future. The past, with all its anger and betrayal, had faded into the background. As for Stephen, well, he tried reaching out a few times. He even suggested we partner up his vision now with me as a co-owner. I laughed when I saw that message. Maybe he thought I had forgotten everything. But I hadn't. I wasn't going to work with him again. I'd worked too hard to get where I was, and I wasn't going to let anyone ruin that. And Stephen, he'd learned the hard way that knowing how to manage a business on paper doesn't mean you know how to run one in the real world. Now, my shop is doing better than ever. We expanded into 2 locations, hired a solid team, and customers are coming in from all over the city. It's not about the money anymore. It's about knowing that what I built is mine, and no one can take that away. Looking back, I realize how far I've come. I didn't just win because I outsmarted anyone or beat them at their own game. I won because I stayed true to what I knew. I worked hard, kept my head down, and never gave up. It's easy to get caught up in wanting revenge. But in the end, the best revenge is living well. And that's exactly what I'm doing. So, what's the takeaway here? It's simple. Never let anyone underestimate you. Never let anyone tell you that you can't build something because of where you started. Hard work, experience, and loyalty are more valuable than any degree or title. And above all, success doesn't happen overnight. It comes from years of doing the right thing, even when it seems like no one is watching. If you've learned something from my story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below, let me know what you think, and don't forget to like and subscribe. There's a lot more to come. And trust me, you won't want to miss it. Thanks for sticking with me through this. Your journey is your own, and it's up to you to define your success. Just remember, no one can take that from you.